Greetings, I'm Andy,
I'm Mark.
and this is an episode of It Belongs in a Museum. It's actually a bit of old audio we recorded back during the Glowing Tire Golden Sahara episode, but that episode was so perfect to just focus on that car that this was going to be lost media. And then the Fallout teaser came out
Mm-hmm.
for season 2,
It,
and Mark reminded me, didn't we already do research for a nuclear-powered Fallout car?
because you were like, what's a Fallout-y type topic we could talk about? And
Because
it's
I'm
like, well, the atomic car.
Yeah, and not even for like brand synergy. Just because I like Fallout and I'm like in the mood to talk about Fallout. So, Walton Goggins, grab your Nuka-Cola, put on your Vault Boy, and go into your
Yeah.
bunker.
Much like Fallout, you'll be sifting through old, lost things to find some gems.
And enjoy this episode about a nuclear-powered concept car. I looked for because that was my idea originally. I was going to cover this. And I think we actually have time to talk about the Ford Nucleon,
Is that
the nuclear-powered car.
I was gonna say, if it's not, the name is.
The Ford Nucleon had a little bit less going on with it because it only got made to scale model and was never made as like a here, take a look, because legitimately it was limited by the technology of its time. It was a concept saying when your technologies shrink these technologies, when the future does the natural progression of all science, which is to create something that we just now understand and makes it more attainable and smaller, you'll be able to make this car that we designed. It was a template for the future.
I mean, and we've hit a lot of those.
And this debuted in the same year, 1958, called the Ford Nucleon. And if you want to look that up on your device, I'll have images up here for people. It's a deceptive car because, in my opinion, it looks like it should drive in the opposite way that it does. It's oriented like a pickup truck.
Oh, yeah.
But in my mind, it should be driving the other way, with the long end forward like a classic muscle car roadster.
Yeah, it definitely.
If you've played the opening to Fallout 4, you've seen a bunch of riffs on this car.
Yeah,
or if
but
you've
I'll
watched
say
the Amazon show.
they made their cars look a bit more normal, like car-like. This, it looks like a well-used bar of soap that then someone put a cockpit very close to the end.
That's a fair description, I would say. It was a concept.
Why are the tires so far back?
I'm about to get into that. So the concept was going to be capable of 5,000 miles of driving on a single tank, if you want to call it that. They called it a power capsule.
Oh, that's a very of the era.
It was 16.7 feet wide. It basically had the proportions of like the modern Ford Maverick small truck, but this was considered kind of bizarre at the time. It had a 5.8 foot distance in its wheelbase, which is incredible. It's like a smart car's wheelbase on a pickup truck. Granted, a small one. It's not an F-150 or 350, but it's kind of funny that it's so small. Yeah, it's comparable to the Ford Maverick compact truck modern day in length. The reason the wheelbase was so small was for weight balance, and the reason the driver cockpit is so forward is they wanted as much distance between you and the nuclear reactor as possible.
Shockingly sensible.
Which they did have like lead plating and all this stuff in mind, but they wanted to add extra, which is actually in universe why the nacelles of the Starship Enterprise are so far away from where all the crew is. It's so that there's no radiation that gets to the people.
Huh.
So it's sort of chicken and the egg.
Granted, if you rear-ended the Ford Nucleon.
Oh yeah, no, it's what was it, the Pinto?
Yeah, it was the
Yeah, it's we're gonna get into that. That's actually not the primary reason this never made it to any form of production, by the way.
Yeah, Ford has a real issue with them never considering, hey, what happens if someone hits the back of our car?
So the car would run on a personal small nuclear reactor called a power capsule.
Mm-hmm.
The forward cab was to keep you away from radiation. It would run on only a small handful of radioactive pellets.
I'm seeing a lot of Jetsonian terminology thrown in, something that requires a lot more security.
In theory, the power capsule would then generate thermal energy powering a steam mechanism which would propel the car forward.
Yeah, for those who aren't aware, that's effectively how nuclear generators work. It's effectively nuclear energy is very hot, and so instead of coals or something in an engine, you have that heating up water and cooling, and so
But as a scientist said when looking back at the Ford concept car, the problem with thermal to kinetic energy, the conversion of energy forms, he compared it to currency when you go to like the airport and you exchange your currency. It doesn't matter what you start with or what you're aiming for, you always end up losing something in the process.
Yeah.
So it would have been maybe slightly less efficient than they hoped. That still isn't the primary hiccup they ran into. The real problem was the fact that the cooling was going to be very hard on such a small scale. The idea was to fill basically the bed of the truck side of it with as many fins as possible, but without enough internal space to like run fluid through to cool it, you functionally just couldn't lose enough thermal mass to keep your nuclear reactor from overheating.
Huh. And that is, there was an interview with an engineer that I saw, and he brought up that, like, whenever you're miniaturizing something, it always comes down to how, like, what is the thing like, how small can you make it with it still working?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, often when miniaturizing something, they'll, like, if they're using, like, a propellant for, like, launching a dart or something, instead of going for, like, springs or, like, a tension thing, they'll just go compressed air because it's easier to miniaturize that.
Another comparison that people might understand is like a graphics card for your computer, your heating, your power draw, trying to miniaturize that for a laptop, you end up paying more and it usually ends up less powerful. Like even if it's technically a lot of the same stuff, it's not going to run as efficiently. And the cooling, it's not a direct one-to-one. You lost 10% of your cooling fins. You're 10% hotter now. It doesn't work that way.
Because heat builds, so
Yes.
it quickly becomes an issue.
So, like I said, they were literally limited by the technology of their time, just like Howard Stark. In order to properly do this, they would have needed some form of, instead of it being an exhaustless car, it would have had to have a steam exhaust coming out the back.
Oh.
And so,
I mean,
which is something that's been proposed by people who want to create cars that are basically hydrogen powered.
yeah. The issue is separating, water,
the vapor.
the hydrogen and stuff, because that requires energy, and where do you get that energy?
So, this vision would have only been possible if the nuclear reactor had been miniaturized and if the heating components had been upgraded, which they could not at the time. As a result of the fact that they knew they couldn't develop that, it was only ever a vision of a possible future. And they were essentially just saying, we want you to make this someday if you can. And it was just meant to inspire us. But so you may be thinking that, hey, if you rear end a Ford Nucleon, you could cause a explosion of nuclear variety.
Yeah, well, kind of worse, because nuclear bombs are like a lot of energy very quick. Nuclear reactors are a lot of energy slowly over time.
Leaking.
Yeah, so that's where you get Chernobyl.
So the real issue, because that was a problem, and they didn't get around to solving it because these other problems got in the way first, and they figured if we've already made heat dispersal better, we've made small nuclear, when we could, nuclear-wise, we could make this now.
Yeah.
They're like, surely they'll figure that part out too. By 2025, these people will be so advanced and such a peaceful species without war, without poverty. There'll be a united Jetsonian world. We don't need to worry about it.
Yeah,
so we've fallen a little short. But actually, the problem was that enriching radioactive material for the pellets was more costly and difficult than fuel costs then and even now.
You don't say.
I do say.
Well, now there's a area that indie developers can get into and really push the market.
But this was only ever made at like 3/4 scale out of sheet metal, and currently sits in a museum that you can look at. But
hopefully with no pellets included.
Because the technologies were never created. It is just a shell at 3/4 scale that you can look at, which is what a lot of the photos come from. Whereas the Golden Sahara is a real car that was driven for decades and is still technically drivable now, but sits in a very nice museum where they don't really care to drive it.
I really want to see like Zombieland I Am Legend thing where there's just a bunch of people who raided that car museum and it's like a Mad Max of concept cars.
That would be very cool. So, if you're ever in Chicago, Illinois, check out that collection of cars. And I guess this brings us to kind of a silly question of whether or not these items, which are already in respective museums, belong in a museum. So, do you think that the nuclear-powered car belongs in a museum?
I think you have the scale model and everything, but then you also would need to have some people modern day who are like, hey, this is probably what would have happened had they actually built it. Like the implications of a whole bunch of nuclear devices.
Here's my pitch, because I saw something similar to this at a Air and Space Museum, except theirs was like a space shuttle thing or something like that. You get in a like sort of model version of the car to scale. It's just the bubble dome in the seat, and you get in and you have to try and drive without bumping into the other cars and setting off a nuclear explosion.
Oh.
As a way of like, look at what the world almost was. Also, aren't you glad that we can't turn a fender bender into a nuclear explosion?
Yeah. What car was it? It was like the Pinto that if you rear-ended it.
With the gas tank.
Yeah, it just exploded.
But that's how I would do it. Like a sort of like augmented reality experience.
Yeah.
I think that'd be super duper fun. Plus, kids love that stuff. Who doesn't like getting behind the wheel of a toy car? That I will tell you, at the museums, those interactive displays are the ones that people use the most.
Oh, yeah, because that's the cool stuff.
What? Hey, heard you boys were talking about that stuff. I'm gonna go hang out with my good friend Walton Goggins. He has to pick me up and drive me right now because I sold all my damn planes to Tom Cruise. I guess I won't be driving around in a nuclear-powered car for a while, but I guess I could put this display up in the museum. No, my voice hasn't changed at all. This is how I've been doing it the whole time. All right, I'll see you later, Illinois. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as our listeners always do, as does Mark, who loves this running bit.